Rome didn't fall because of barbarians at the gates. By the time the Visigoths sacked the city, the empire was already dead, hollowed out from the inside. We are taught that Rome collapsed due to war or corruption or lead pipes. But the real cause was simpler and more dangerous. Rome fell because the rich deleted the middle class. Legally, systematically, over 200 years. It happened in four phases. First, they consolidated the land. Then, they trapped the population in debt. Then, they killed the politicians who tried to stop it. Finally, they handed out free entertainment to keep the survivors from revolting. Does that sound like ancient history? Or does it sound like the news? We are watching the exact same pattern play out in America, and we are further along the timeline than you think. Let me show you the numbers. In 1971, the American dream had a mathematical formula. 61% of adults were middle class. A single income could buy a house, a car, and a pension. The system was designed to create owners. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Republic ran on the exact same math. They didn't have suburban dads. They had the assidui, citizen farmers who owned the dirt under their feet. At the height of the Republic, they made up 60% of the population. Both civilizations peaked when the majority held the deed to the land. Both began their collapse the moment they decided to delete that majority. Let me show you how they did it, and why you'll recognize every step. It started with the soil. The destruction of the Roman middle class wasn't an accident. It was a business model. When a Roman soldier was drafted to fight in the Punic Wars, he didn't go away for a weekend. He was gone for years, a decade fighting Hannibal or securing provinces in Spain. While he was bleeding for the Republic, his small farm back home was dying. The fields went fallow. The fences broke. But his neighbor wasn't struggling. His neighbor was a senator, a patrician, a man who stayed home. And when the soldier finally walked back up his driveway, exhausted and broke, that neighbor was waiting with a cash offer. The rich bought up thousands of distressed farms for pennies on the denarius. Then they combined them into massive, factory-style estates called latifundia. A citizen with a plow and a mule couldn't compete with a plantation running on slave labor. The cost of production was near zero. So he sold. He moved to the city. He went from owner to renter. That was 2,000 years ago. Now let me show you the same playbook running today. Look at Iowa. Look at Kansas. Since the 1980s, the United States has lost over 500,000 farms. In the last 7 years alone, another 160,000. Drive through the Midwest. Hollowed out towns. Main streets boarded up. Schools consolidating. Who bought the land? Not another family. A corporation. Today, 20% of farms control nearly 70% of all farmland. The latifundia has a stock ticker now. It uses algorithms instead of overseers, government subsidies instead of slave labor. But the math is identical. The big four meat packers control 85% of beef. The big four grain traders control 90% of grain. They squeezed independent producers until they broke, bought their land, and turned them into employees. The Roman farmer lost his independence to the patrician. The American farmer lost his to the shareholder. The mechanism evolved. The eviction notice didn't. But losing the land was only phase one. To truly break a middle class, you have to trap them. Phase two was the debt. In Rome, veterans who lost their farms tried to borrow money to start over. But the banks, run by the same senators who bought their land, offered terms designed to fail. The contract was called nexum, 5 witnesses, a bronze scale. You didn't pledge your house as collateral, you pledged your body. Miss a payment, and the creditor didn't ruin your credit score. He took you. He could chain you, work you, beat you, or sell you across the Tiber. The citizen soldier traded his freedom for a loan he could never pay back. Sound familiar? Look at the master promissory note a teenager signs today. We told an entire generation the only way to join the middle class is to buy a degree. So they borrow. Americans now owe $1.7 trillion in student loans. The average borrower carries nearly $38,000. 70% of millennials carry debt. Here's the trap. Interest rates are set so high you can pay for years and owe more than when you started. I see the comments every day. I borrowed $40,000, paid $20,000 over 10 years. Now I owe $45,000. That is nexum without the bronze scales. Roman veterans came home from war with nothing. Modern graduates enter the workforce with less than nothing. Negative net worth, both locked out of the primary wealth-building mechanism of their time. For Romans, it was land. For you, it's a house. Every $1,000 in student debt reduces homeownership likelihood by 1.8%. Boomers bought their first house at 25. Millennials wait until 34. You aren't bad with money. You aren't buying too much avocado toast. You are living in a debt trap designed 20 centuries ago. Drop a comment. What did debt delay for you? A house? Marriage? Kids? I want to see the scale of this trap. But here is where the story gets violent. In 133 BCE, a Roman aristocrat named Tiberius Gracchus looked at the latifundia, looked at homeless veterans in the streets, and decided to act. His platform was simple: enforce the law. It was technically illegal for one man to own that much public land. Tiberius proposed breaking up the estates and giving land back to citizens. The people loved him. They flooded the streets. But the Senate didn't debate him. On the day of the vote, a mob of senators and their thugs marched into the assembly. They grabbed the wooden legs of benches. They beat Tiberius Gracchus to death in front of the Capitol, killed 300 supporters, and threw their bodies in the Tiber. 10 years later, his brother Gaius tried again. The Senate declared emergency, hunted him down. He committed suicide before capture. They executed 3,000 of his followers. Why was reform impossible? Because the Roman Senate wasn't a government. It was a landlord's club. The men making the laws owned the latifundia. The men voting on debt relief were the creditors collecting interest. They blocked reform because reform threatened their net worth. Now let me show you what replaced the clubs. We used lobbying, super PACs. Congress has introduced the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act, the End Hedge Fund Control of American Homes Act, the Stop Predatory Investing Act. All stalled, all died in committee. Why? The donor class is the new Senate. In 2014, Princeton and Northwestern researchers analyzed 1,800 U.S. policy changes over 20 years. Their conclusion? Average citizens have little or no independent influence on policy. When elites want a law, it passes. When the majority wants a law but elites disagree, near zero chance. The Gracchi were killed by the landlord class. Modern reform is killed by the donor class. Method changed, outcome identical. So if you take away their land, trap them in debt, and block every fix, how do you stop them from burning the city down? Phase 4. Distract them. The poet Juvenal named it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Free grain to the poor, not enough to prosper, just enough to not starve. And the arenas. The Colosseum wasn't entertainment. It was political technology, gladiator fights, beast hunts, chariot races, something to cheer for, argue about, focus on, other than their stolen land. Give them bread and circus, and they will never revolt. Today, the Colosseum fits in your pocket. The average American spends 7 hours a day on screens. TikTok is the circus. The algorithm is the gladiator fight. We scroll through 15-second dopamine hits while rent goes up 40%. We fight strangers in comment sections about culture war distractions while BlackRock buys the neighborhood. Snap benefits are the modern bread. Infinite scrolling is the modern circus. Every hour doom scrolling is an hour you aren't organizing. Every hour watching the spectacle is an hour the latifundia grows. And that brings us to the part no one wants to talk about. This is the final phase before the fall. In Rome, the murder of the Gracchi in 133 BCE was the point of no return. What followed was 100 years of chaos. 107 BCE, General Marius recruited the landless poor, promising them land if they fought for him, not Rome. Soldiers became loyal to generals, not the state. Private armies were born. 88 BCE, Sulla marched those armies on Rome itself. 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon. 27 BCE, the Republic ended. Augustus became emperor. The middle class was gone, replaced by subjects. Now let me show you where America is on that same timeline. The American middle class dropped from 61% to 51%. The bottom half owns 2.5% of wealth. The top 1% owns more than the entire middle class combined. 57 million Americans work the gig economy. No benefits, no security, no ownership. We aren't approaching the cliff. We are falling past the ledge. The question isn't whether the pattern is running. The question is whether you see it. The Romans who saw it coming didn't wait for the Senate to save them. They converted currency into real assets: gold, land, productive businesses, things the emperor couldn't debase and inflation couldn't eat. The citizens who didn't see it became dependents of the state, fed, entertained, and owned. You can't stop the pattern. It's a cycle as old as civilization. But you can stop pretending it isn't happening. You can stop measuring your worth against a rigged game. The first step is realizing you are in the timeline. You just did. If this satisfies anything, hit subscribe, because the history they don't teach is the history that protects you. Position accordingly.